Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 42 of The Right Take. I'm Eric Lindrum.
I'm Jacob Grandstaff.
And we've got quite a bit of good news on this particular podcast. We've got hopeful news about a possible bright future for the American right. We've got some very good news about how, yes, cancel culture does work for the right if we know how to use it properly. And of course, we do also have some more serious updates on the front of perhaps the most crucial issue of our time, which is still and always has been immigration. But before we get to the main topic, we've got to start off with a bit of a breaking news update, if you will. At the time of recording, this came out yesterday, October 22nd. We talked previously, of course, about how Attorney General Merrick Garland has basically sicked the FBI and the DOJ on parents who dare to protest school boards, because apparently you're not allowed to criticize school boards anymore for pushing, transgender policies and critical race theory and stuff like that in their schools and their curriculum and in their bathroom policies. And the FBI basically said, and the DOJ said, we're going to start considering these people domestic terrorists, and we're going to conduct surveillance on them. We're going to buzz them with police helicopters. We're going to use SWAT teams to arrest them if they dare to speak up about, a trans student raping a girl. And a lot of this arguably started when the National School Boards Association, the NSBA, sent a letter to the Biden administration in late September demanding that these parents be labeled as, quote, domestic terrorists. Without citing any evidence, of course, they claimed that, these parents are threatening us, they're harassment and threats of violence and intimidation. And the Biden administration basically answered the beck and call of the NSBA. And now a memorandum has been issued by the NSBA to NSBA members from the NSBA Board of Directors, dated October 22nd, 2021. Message to NSBA members. Quote, as you all know, there has been extensive media and other attention recently around our letter to President Biden regarding threats and acts of violence against school board members, end quote. They're still going for that line of like, oh, it's violence. Quote, we wanted to write you directly to address this matter. On behalf of NSBA, and this part is underlined, we regret and apologize for the letter. To be clear, the safety of school board members, other public school officials and educators and students is our top priority, and there remains important work to be done on this issue. However, there was no justification for some of the language included in the letter. We should have had a better process in place to allow for consultation on a communication of this significance. We apologize also for the strain and stress this situation, great alliteration there, has caused you and your organizations. We are going to do better going forward. We are engaged in a, underlined, formal review of our processes and procedures. We will announce, underlined, specific improvements soon to ensure there is improved coordination and consultation among our staff, our board, and our members across the country. The review will include not only the proceedings leading to the letter, but also other related concerns raised by members before the letter was sent. We will have more to share with you soon as our review continues. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you. So what does this mean? Check and mate. You guys are done. So all it took was outrage, which is what this caused, of course. It was widespread outrage. They caused even more protests. Parents started carrying signs saying, we are not domestic terrorists. We are not, concerned parents are not terrorists, which is true. It was almost like a Streisand effect. They tried to bury it, and it got even worse because they tried to bury it, and they tried to say, we got to clamp down on these people. Well, guess what? When you try to clamp down hard enough, they're only going to lash out even more. And it worked. And it was covered in Fox, it was covered in right-wing media, and now they have been forced to back down, especially when an investigation by a watchdog group revealed emails confirming the NSBA was colluding, dare I say, use the word collusion, with the Biden administration to basically write this letter before the letter was released. So that the special interest groups using their puppet strings on the administration and on Biden himself was exposed. And they, once you shine a little bit of light on them, like cockroaches, they run scattering. So This is good. This is proof that we absolutely can put pressure on them when we start attacking and get them on defense. And you're seeing this in, for example, the Virginia governor's race, where Glenn Youngkin is absolutely on offense with critical race theory. He's talking all about critical race theory and education, and McAuliffe is constantly on defense, as are the Democrats on behalf of McAuliffe and on behalf of Biden.
Well, this is what progressives always do. Anytime that they're emboldened, they always overreact. They always overstep their bounds. They always push above and beyond what the limit is, because they're ultimately totalitarians. They want to create a totalitarian society in which you cannot be anything but a progressive. They want that type of Soviet oppression on their political enemies, and they will always do what is politically expedient. But whenever you have a catalyst like the George Floyd riots, and all the corporations are behind the BLM movement, they look at that as their opportunity to finally take over American society. Because if you look at the way progressivism has progressed throughout the decades, it's been incrementalism. Like in 2010, America was the society that progressives wanted in 1970. But when the George Floyd riots happened, they're like, hey, we don't have to wait till 2050 to get to 2050. We can get there next year if we can go ahead and put the pedal to the metal. And what this is this was basically, high-class Antifa. These are basically high-class Antifa operatives who sent this letter, who supported this letter, because this is a form of anarcho-tyranny. Because in their minds, Antifa has taken over the government. Antifa has captured the federal government. So rather than having to because last year what was happening is they were sending mobs to people's houses to intimidate them. So they're thinking, well, we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to get street operatives and the homeless to get out there and harangue people in their homes. We can just get the DOJ to do it. And so this is a classic example of them overstepping. The PR in this Loudoun County rape case, this was a PR nightmare for them, because the very guy who was the catalyst for them sending this letter, it turns out his daughter was raped at school. His 14-year-old daughter was raped at school. He had a justification for being angry. And so this is a complete PR nightmare for them. This is something that, and here's the thing, conservatives shouldn't accept this. They shouldn't just say, oh, okay, they apologized, all is forgiven.
I mean, to keep kicking them while they're down. Because
you have to understand, this is something that conservatives, some of them are just finally starting to come around to. You can't appeal to progressives' better angels.
Because they have none.
To them, progressivism is the exhibition of their better angels. It's not a political crusade in their minds. It's a moral crusade. Progressivism is morality to them. It is their religion. It is their ethical framework. So you can't really appeal to their better angels, because it's their better angels that have essentially been co-opted to promote progressivism. So there's nothing to appeal to. You can't convert people like that. You have to defeat them. And so in a situation like this, conservatives don't need to stop. They don't need to say, okay, we forced an apology, cancel culture worked for us, so let's just go back to life as normal. No. You need to root these people out, find out who supported the letter, find out who penned the letter, and you need to push until they are fired, forced to retire. And this has actually been happening across school boards in the United States. There's been a lot of school board members that just quit. They got tired of all the harassment. They got tired of all the protests. They just walked away. Same with teachers. A lot of teachers who have been pushing the critical race theory, they've just given up. They've gone home. They figure, you know what? I'll be an activist in another area. Because the thing is, these school board members and these teachers that are pushing this stuff, they aren't school board members and teachers. They are activists. They're social activists who have infiltrated institutions specifically to take those institutions, in this case, the school system, the education system, to promote their progressive ideology, which is an offshoot of Marxism. So a lot of people wonder, okay, well, how did we get to the point where you have revolutionaries, basically revolutionary activists who are in these positions of authority and are pushing stuff that would just be absurd 10 years ago? Like even liberals 10 years ago wouldn't support this stuff. They would vigorously oppose this stuff. The reason for this is, yes, there is an element of indoctrination. A lot of younger liberals have come through the university system and have been indoctrinated to believe this stuff. They genuinely believe America is racist, and I'm reminded of this every time I happen to go into D.C. As an example, yesterday, so just north of DuPont Circle, there's this white woman who's walking across the crosswalk, and she's got on her purse, it says July 4th, 1776, with an X across that date. And underneath it has whatever date in 1619 that the first African slave was brought to Virginia. And so the implication being the founding wasn't July 4th, 1776. The founding of the country was when the first African slave was brought here. And of course, this is a white woman. This is an example of the indoctrination working. So there are a lot of genuine people who are genuine converts to this ideology. The vast majority of voters who voted for Joe Biden, though, don't support this stuff because they don't know what it is. They haven't been presented with the option. Do you support critical race theory or do you not support critical race theory? Most of them wouldn't be able to define it if you asked them what it is. And in fact, most of them would probably respond, who have heard of it, would say, well, that's just a Republican talking point. That's a right wing. It's a made up. It's mythology. There's no such thing.
As Terry McAuliffe keeps saying, it's a dog whistle. It's a racist dog whistle.
Yeah, and just like Joe Biden was able to say that the whole Hunter Biden laptop story was just Russian misinformation, because his voters genuinely believe that. And for the rest of us who have actually been paying attention to the news and watched something other than CNN, we're thinking, well, he just lost the election. How is he able to do that? No, that didn't cost him the election, because most of the people who were going to vote for him anyway, they don't read the New York Post.
And also when he said Antifa is just an idea. Yeah, an idea that burned down half of America and murdered Trump supporters in the streets. Oh, it's just an idea. And most of his voters believe that.
But see, most of his voters aren't aware of the extent of the pillage, of the killings, of the burning, of the looting, because they didn't see any of it.
They were peaceful protests because CNN said so.
Exactly. And if you don't believe me, if you think that I'm just trying to cope with the fact that the country has moved to the left, I'm just trying to cope and say, well, yeah, if you parse out the data in these polls, it's actually a slight majority that's with us when we're actually losing. If you think that I'm just trying to be hopeful and optimistic, let me present to you our Attorney General, Merrick Garland. So Merrick Garland is the pinnacle of the boomer liberal. You know, imagine every single white liberal around Arlington County, like Merrick Garland is what they would hope he is, the pinnacle of success that they would look at and say, that's kind of what I would aspire my kids to be. So get this, he was called before Congress. This was a couple of days ago, and he was asked about two particular issues that have been all over the news, at least all over conservative news outlets. And this shows how our news is so divided between ideology. You know, people don't watch the same news, they don't read the same newspapers. But these are stories that most conservatives have heard about multiple times. The Attorney General of the United States, listen to his ignorance on these issues.
And we're playing this video at 1.25 speed just for reference, because it is a fairly long video cut.
Attorney General Garland, do you know where Broad Run High School is? Do you know where Broad Run High School is?
And his mic isn't on, so they didn't turn his mic on, but you can see him like shaking his head and mouthing the word no.
Ashburn, Virginia, in Loudoun County, Virginia. Do you know why I care? Because I'm a graduate of Loudoun Valley High School. Despite my family having Texas roots back to the 1850s, I grew up in Loudoun. It was my home.
And that's Congressman Chip Roy, by the way, who's grilling him. Doing a fantastic job, by the way, as you're about to hear.
October 6th, a mere 15 days ago, inside Broad Run High School in Loudoun County, Virginia, a young girl was sexually assaulted. Attorney General Garland, are you aware that because Loudoun County prosecutors confirmed that the boy who assaulted this young girl in Broad Run High School is the same boy who wore a skirt and went into a girl's bathroom, sodomized and raped a 14-year-old girl in a different Loudoun County high school on May 28th? Are you aware of those facts? The boy was, are you aware firmly, are you aware further that the boy was arrested and charged for the first assault in July but released from juvenile detention?
This sounds like a state case, and I'm not familiar with it. I'm sorry.
Do you agree with Loudoun parents who said it is not okay to allow a child that has been charged with a rape to go back into a school in that public school system?
Again, I don't know any of the facts of this case, but the way you put it, it certainly sounds like I would agree with you. But I don't know the facts of the case.
Is the FBI or the Department of Justice investigating the Loudoun School Board for violating civil rights or under authority of, say, the Violence Against Women Act?
I don't believe so, but I don't know the answer to that.
I'd ask why not, because on June 22nd at a school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia, the superintendent, Scott Ziegler, declared in front of the father of the girl who had been raped that the predator, transgender student, or person simply does not exist. And that to his knowledge, we don't have any records of assaults occurring in our restrooms. When this statement bothered the father of the girl, I'm a father of a daughter, I believe you are too, sir, the girl who had been raped, sodomized in the bathroom of a high school by a dude wearing a skirt, that father reacted. Now, that father reacted by simply using a derogatory word. Would that statement have bothered you if your daughter had been raped, if somebody said that it didn't occur?
Again, I don't know anything about the facts of this case, but derogatory words are not what my memorandum is about.
Well, the victim's mother is heard on a cell phone video telling the crowd what happened. My child was raped at school, she said. Behind her, the victim's father is seen being arrested, bloodied. This arrest of a 48-year-old plumber became the poster boy for the new domestic terrorism the Biden administration, the administration in which you serve, has concocted to destroy anyone who gets in the way. As the ranking member said, the National School Boards Association wrote a letter to the president citing Smith's case. We all know this to be true. Attorney General, do you believe that a father attending a meeting, exercising his First Amendment rights, and yes, getting angry about whatever lies are being told about his daughter being raped in the school he sent her to be educated in, that this is domestic terrorism? Yes or no?
No, I do not think that parents getting angry at school boards for whatever reason constitute domestic terrorism. It's not even a close question.
To be clear, even if there's a threat of violence, Do you believe that it is domestic terrorism that the FBI has the power to target American citizens in local disputes because a father gets mad? Now, I'm not saying Mr. Smith did that. In fact, he didn't. I can tell you how I sure as hell would have reacted. Mr. Smith should be given a medal for his calm to be able to hold back his anger. Are you aware that Loudoun County failed to report this sexual assault according to state law? And are you investigating this?
Again, I'm sorry. I don't know anything about this case.
So notice, first off, bravo to Congressman Roy there, but the way he's weaseling around this, he just keeps, when asked, like, wouldn't you be upset if your daughter was raped and they said that didn't happen? He keeps deferring, oh, I don't know anything about the case. It's a state case. It's a state case. Oh, but it wasn't a state case when, your FBI, when your DOJ decided to work with the FBI to label these people as domestic terrorists for school board meetings in Virginia. That apparently wasn't a state case. That you made that a federal case.
So one of the things that Roy points out is he's asking him, are you investigating this as a potential Title IX violation? Are you investigating the school board or whatever? Because the reason why he's asking that is because what happens every time there's a racist hoax in the school?
They send the FBI in to investigate.
Yeah. It's a civil rights violation. And in fact, in this during this session, Garland actually brags about having increased, I think, nearly doubled the workforce in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department.
That's what we needed, yeah.
It's exactly what we need, because we need to investigate all of the white supremacists who are,
The noose is being hung in NASCAR garages.
So they'll send 17 FBI agents to go investigate that. They'll spend, countless hours and, hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' money on that. The reason why the federal government has not investigated this issue in Loudoun County, the reason why the Attorney General hasn't even heard of it, is because it's not on the radar of progressive activists. The right does not have an activist wing like progressives do. So there are literally tens of thousands of progressive activists, many of whom are professional community organizers, professional activists, that all they do is try to root out alleged cases of racism. And of course, whenever you got that large of an army of online activists, not even online activists, many of just community organizers, a la Barack Obama, whose entire goal in life is to make life miserable for quote unquote racists, then obviously the Department of Justice is going to be notified every time that there is any 16-year-old white kid anywhere who uses a derogatory racial slur against a black person. And of course, they're going to send the full power and force of the federal government on that. And you can imagine if this had been a white kid who had raped a 14-year-old black girl, do you really think that Merrick Garland wouldn't have heard of it? And the thing is, I believe Merrick Garland when he says that he has no knowledge of this case, because you got to remember, this is the thing that a lot of people mistake when it comes to liberals in government. They assume that they all read the same news we can because we have the internet. We all have access to the same news sources. But the average teenager is going to be who wants to be informed, can be more informed than, say, the Attorney General, just because he's more internet savvy. The Attorney General is an older man who honestly should be retired. I mean, most of these people in government should have retired 10 years ago. They're in their 70s. Some of them are in their 80s. They don't have any business being in this position. Their faculties aren't all there.
Same goes for Congress, for that matter. This is, by the way, this is in a hearing at the House Judiciary Committee, whose chairman is Jerry Nadler, who's like 100 years old.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't have...
He fell asleep at the meeting. There's actually video that Lauren Boebert filmed of Nadler sleeping with his mask on, like, hunched over, just like...
Oh, I believe it. But the thing is, if we, the right, attacks these people, these old people who are in government, as villains. The reality is these people aren't running anything. Joe Biden doesn't run anything. It's the millennials who are behind these people who are running the government. It's the Gen Xers behind. They're the speech writers,
the chiefs of staff.
They're the writers who craft the legislation. They're the activists the lobbyists. They are the ones who are running this stuff. Merrick Garland, he's just an old suit. He's sitting there. He can barely. He's fumbling with his mic. He barely, knows how to use this technology. He knows these people are old. It's the same way with the Mueller case. Like, people were attacking Robert Mueller as this villain, this mastermind, and he goes before Congress, and it turns out
he's a babbling, stuttering mess.
It turns out he doesn't even know what's in the report that he allegedly wrote, which is because he didn't write it. None of these people write any of the stuff that goes out under their name. So when Garland says that he doesn't have any knowledge of this, says sounds like a state case. I heard it best described this way when it comes to Republicans in the D.C. suburbs, especially in Northern Virginia, is the reason why this area has turned so strongly blue is because Republicans to these people are ambassadors from Mars. And what I mean by that is you take somebody like Merrick Garland, a professional who is at the pinnacle of his career, And he sees these Republicans, these right-wingers, waving their arms and screaming on the street, this girl was raped, this 14-year-old girl was raped, you're not doing anything about it, why aren't you doing anything about it? And he's like, that's a local police matter. There's thousands of people who are raped every month in this country. It's a big country. Why are you pestering me with this local matter? Go talk to the sheriff. I don't have any control over that. I'm late to I'm going out to get brunch. Stop bothering me. I've got an important meeting. Why are you pestering me with this? And this is the mentality. These people, their standard of living is so much higher than the rest of the country that they can't figure out why the rest of the country is unhappy. And it's like Obama, and during a campaign speech in Florida in 2018, he said, what's weird about right-wingers is even when they win elections, they're still unhappy. Like when we win elections, we're glad we won. We're happy. When right-wingers win, they're still unhappy. Well, the reason is because when we elect Republicans
don't do anything.
Don't do anything. So obviously the people are staying perpetually unhappy. But in a case like this, where you've got a rape in a school district, that would not have happened if it weren't for the transgender policy that Merrick Garland's DOJ supports, then it is an issue for the federal government, and especially in a case where the school district tried to cover it up.
Yeah, again, you said before, imagine if it had been a white boy raping a black girl, it would be all over the case. Especially imagine if the school had covered it up, covered up for a white student.
This is definitely a Title IX case, but because conservatives they're finally starting to wake up that you're going to have to become an activist if you actually want the government to work for you, because they're not primed in this culture, this activist culture. They don't really have any channels to send this information to the DOJ. I think they just assume, well, of course the Attorney General knows about it. He's just ignoring it because he doesn't have any sympathy for a conservative dad whose daughter's raped. No, like most liberals, they're completely clueless about this stuff.
I mean, to be fair, he probably doesn't have sympathy for the guy anyway.
No, I disagree. I think I think if he knew the facts of the case, he would be 100% behind Mr.
Knowing
Smith.
that, again, at the heart of this is the transgender policy. They're
Even so. But here's the thing. Most liberals, I don't think they, like I mentioned the previous episode when we discussed this, I don't think most liberals have actually thought through the transgender stuff. In their mind, they literally believe the propaganda they're being fed. They believe that youth who identify as transgenders are being murdered, they're being bullied in school, they're being beaten up.
Elizabeth Warren says there's like a record high number of black trans women being murdered.
But they believe that. They believe they're being driven to suicide. So in their mind, if it saves a life, if it stops a teenager from committing suicide, let them use the bathroom of their choice. It's not a big deal. Move on. Let's focus on education. Don't worry about it. Let's be nice to everybody and be kind. And then when they see right-wingers pitching a fit about it, it's like, what is wrong with these people? Why do they have to make such a big deal about everything? Something that's this inconsequential. Like, I've talked to the liberals around here before, and they're like, this was back at the height of the whole transgender bathroom thing, like 2017. They're like, let's don't focus on this. This stuff is such a distraction. Let's just focus on economic growth. Let's focus on lower, and this was funny, is most of them are fiscal conservatives. They're like, let's focus on lowering taxes, lowering regulations. Don't worry about all that stuff, all those social issues. But because they're in a bubble, in a media bubble, they're not presented with the facts. The media curates the information that they're allowed to see. They don't see stuff like this because, a transgender kid rapes a girl in a bathroom. That has the potential to move the needle on transgender issues 15 to 25 points. That can flip that issue on its head. Rather than it being 45 to 50% of the country that supports this kind of stuff, that can drop very quickly down to 25%, even 20% if the facts are known. But because the media purposely does not allow the leftist voters, the liberal voters, to learn the facts, then you have a situation like this. But this isn't the worst of it. Get a load of this. This is also Merrick Garland in the same hearing.
And this is him getting grilled by Florida Congressman Greg Steube, again on 1.25 speed.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Steube from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Attorney General Garland, in your Senate confirmation hearing, you referred to the January 6th protests as the, and I quote, most dangerous threat to democracy in your law enforcement and judicial career. In that same hearing, you even compared January 6th to the Oklahoma City bombing case you worked on, where 168 people were killed. In June 15th, a speech announcing a new enhanced domestic terrorism policy, you cited January 6th as a motivation for that new policy. You went on to describe January 6th, and I quote, as an assault on a mainstay of our democratic system. You have said that prosecuting extremist attacks on our democratic institution remains central to the mission of the Department of Justice. So suffice it to say, it's clear that you feel very strongly about using the full force of your position to prosecute those involved in the January 6th protests. What is not clear, however, is if you will use the same force against violent left-wing domestic terrorists. Just last week on October 14th, a group of extremist environmental and indigenous protesters forced their way into the Department of Interior. They fought with and injured security and police officers, sending some of those officers to the hospital. The extremists violently pushed their way into a restricted government building in an attempt to thwart the work of the Department of Interior. Police arrested at least 55 protesters on site, but others got away. Mr. Garland, do you believe that these environmental extremists who forced their way into the Department of Interior are also domestic terrorists?
I'm not going to be able to reference that specific incident since this is the first I know about it, but I will say that
I gotta say, I'm sorry. There is no way. Even I knew about that.
No, I believe him. I believe he had no clue. Nobody told him.
There's no way that you don't hear about a breach on a federal building in the heart of D.C., blocks from the White House.
There's no way he could have heard about it because the people who would be there to inform him about it have an agenda, and their agenda is to make sure that this boomer AG is kept in the dark about this stuff.
Department does not care.
So this is the first that you know about an incident where protesters forced themselves into a federal government building right here in D.C. Like you didn't hear about this at all.
This particular example, it doesn't mean the Justice Department doesn't know about it, but I personally haven't.
Oh, they know about it.
Okay, so, all right, you're right. I am proven wrong.
What you're saying right now. But I want to be clear, we don't care whether the violence comes from the left or from the right or from the middle or from up or from down. We will prosecute violations of the law according to the statutes and facts that we have. This is a nonpartisan determination of how to do that.
I don't care if this comes from the left or the right or the up or the down. Jacob, we should start identifying as radical center-uppists, honestly. I wasn't aware that up and down were political positions.
Isn't that what most of the people around D.C. are, radically centrist uppists?
Oh, absolutely.
Uppity ups.
Uppity ups climbing up the ladder. No, but again, this is, and I do, again, this brings me back to why I want to push back a little bit, because obviously he references how Garland, granted, not to the same extent as Joe Biden, but he is constantly talking about January 6th is the worst thing ever. It's the worst thing since the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh. I do think Garland is dangerous. I think he's a radical. If nothing else, keep in mind, what was this guy most famous for prior to being AG? He was a failed Supreme Court nominee. The Republicans in the Senate under Mitch McConnell held up his nomination for a year, and he got denied after of course, Hillary lost in 2016. His seat was instead filled by Neil Gorsuch. So I do believe the moment I heard he was going to be AG, I said, watch out for this guy. If nothing else, he's got a bone to pick with the right. He's got a bone to pick with Republicans over not being a Supreme Court justice. He'd be on the Supreme Court right now otherwise. And no term limits, nothing. And he's going to use this power when he can. And I've seen the videos, and they're in the Department of Interior. They're shoving the cops down. They're storming through the building, through the doors into the lobby. I do think he is dangerous, and I get what you're saying, that he is oblivious. Again, he doesn't even know how to operate a mic at these hearings, but I don't think we should completely dismiss him as completely oblivious.
All right, I'll make it a little clearer for you. And most of us are lawyers here, so we use evidence in court. So you got two pictures here. One picture is from January 6th of individuals forcing themselves into the Capitol. This other picture is extremists forcing themselves into the Interior Department. So looking at these pictures, and I know you say you're not aware of this, which blows my mind that you're not aware of violent extremists forcing their way into a department right here in Washington, D.C., into a federal building. But just with these evidence, with these two pictures that you see here of people forcing themselves into a federal building, would you call both of these acts domestic terrorism?
Look, I'm not going to comment about particular matters. This is a matter that...
I'm not asking you to comment on a particular... I'm asking you to comment on these two photos. You have two pictures of individuals forcing themselves into a government building right here in Washington, D.C. And one, you as I laid out, very welcomely call them domestic terrorists, but you're refusing to call groups like this, who commit the same atrocities here in Washington, D.C., domestic terrorists.
One I know the facts of, the other I don't know the facts of.
Well, I'm showing you pictures. Here's facts right here. If you want, we'll act like we're in a courtroom. Exhibit A, Exhibit B. January 6th, Department of Interior.
Well, as you know,
based on these pictures of people forcing themselves into the...
One picture is not going to be... I'm not going to be able to resolve a legal determination based on one picture. In the January 6th case, we have terabytes of video which disclose exactly what happened.
Video. Terabytes of video, like the video of the Capitol police officers and guards opening the doors and letting the January 6th protesters in. But those videos,
he's making it sound like there is no video of the storming of the Interior Department.
They filmed it themselves. The protesters did. They posted it on Snapchat, TikTok.
They'll stream their crime and post it on Instagram or post it on any number of social media platforms. But you got to remember, he, as old as he is, as out of touch as he is, he hasn't even heard of this. He doesn't have any idea what's going on. And his mind, and this is the mind of most liberals, they're presented with facts by the right of what's going on in the country, of why the right is angry, of why the right believes what it does, and they simply don't believe it. Because here's an example. Let's imagine, for instance, that you didn't hear about 9/11. 9/11 occurs. You're living in Kansas, and none of the news media has reported on it. The Twin Towers are down.
They're living on a
3,000
farm
Americans are
somewhere
dead.
with no TV, no radio.
Well, even if you
nothing.
have a TV and radio, you follow the news, but none of the news outlets that you follow have talked about these Twin Towers falling down. And finally, it becomes so important that they have to mention it, but they just mentioned there was an accident. A couple of planes accidentally crashed into the towers. They fell down. There were a few people who died, and they move on. They don't talk about it. And then you're confronted by people who are mourning, who are sad, who are angry, and you can't figure out, what are you so upset at Muslims for, at Al Qaeda? It was an accident. A couple of planes flew into the World Trade Center. There were a few people who died, a few people who got injured. Why are you making such a big deal about this? And they're hysterically angry at you trying to explain, no, 3,000 people died, this happened and everything. And they show you pictures and you don't believe the pictures.
It was intentional. Like there were more plane crashes that day.
Yeah, you don't believe them. You look at the pictures like, okay, well, it looks like that's photoshopped. You don't believe it because none of the news sources that you follow are talking about it. Mm-hmm. And the few who are talking about it are downplaying it or pretending like it was just it was a non-issue, non-event that happened.
A twin-engine Cessna plane that just bounced off the Twin Towers.
Yep, that's the same attitude that you see from liberals. They see the hysteria from the right, they see the anger from the right, and they're led to believe that these people must just be a bunch of bigots because who else would react like this? Like, the country is going great. Like, everything is fine. Why are these people acting like the sky is falling?
But then conversely, they turn around and you have something like January 6th, which is literally nothing. It's a bunch of boomers going to the Capitol. Most of them literally, storming the Capitol. They're walking between the rope lines in the rotunda. Like they're staying within their lines. They're just taking pictures, looking at the statues and the paintings. Ooh, ah, ooh, ah. Again, nobody dies except one protester gets shot. And this happens. And again, it's no different from all the anti-Kavanaugh protesters who stormed the Capitol and had stages sit in multiple offices in the Capitol. But they take that and they make it sound like, oh, this is literally the worst thing since the Civil War.
Because that's the way that the media that they consume has framed it. Merrick Garland saw the worst of the videos for the worst of the protesters on January 6th. And so you can argue that he's being overzealous, that he has a bone to pick with the right. But the reality is he's acting on the information that he has. He doesn't have any information about the storming of the Department of the Interior, and it's no little thing. 55 people arrested.
That's a lot.
Several officers sent to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
How has he not found out about this?
And
I can tell you how he hasn't found out about it. CNN didn't cover it.
Nope.
Like, none of the major news sources covered it. It wasn't in the headlines. They weren't giving wall-to-wall coverage. I mean, you turned on YouTube for 6 months after January 6th. You were constantly bombarded with local news clips that YouTube purposely curated to show the January 6th protesters being arrested, being carried off in handcuffs as basically a humiliation ritual. Mm-hmm. They made sure that every single person in the country who had internet access knew about the January 6th riot, and they knew the absolute worst events that happened that day.
And the mainstream media, like, what was one of them, like CBS or one of them, produced a documentary, a full-fledged documentary on January 6th, less than 24 hours after it happened.
Yep. And there won't be a documentary based on this Interior Department storming because these are people who are simply trying to save the planet. They're concerned
no oil,
about
no
fossil
pipelines.
fuels. They're concerned about, their children's future. So they are moral protesters. A few of them may have gotten out of hand, but then again, Martin Luther King got out of hand, and he's a hero.
Yeah, he has a monument here in Washington.
Yeah, so these people are just following in the steps of civil disobedience, like the civil rights protesters. So for that reason, why would you alert the AG to this? It's not an issue.
Yeah. Never mind the fact that, if anything, this is even more of a security breach because the Department of Interior is just a few blocks away from the White House. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's even worse. The Capitol is really far. National Mall is really long. It's pretty far away from the White House. But then you have Department of Interior a stone's throw from where Joe Biden is, having his nap time in the Lincoln bedroom. And but it's just, and again, a catastrophic breach of security. There absolutely should have been a SWAT presence, anything immediately to stop this. And it didn't happen. They were allowed to just sit in there and sit on that marble floor and sit in their circles like it's, playtime in kindergarten and do their chants about, pipelines bad, oil bad. Yeah, in the midst of a supply chain crisis, by the way, FYI. But I digress. It's just astounding to me. But this is who we're dealing with. Yeah, at the end of the day, I think there is something to what you're saying, Jacob. That, again, I do think this guy is somewhat sinister, but I definitely get the idea that he, like Biden, and maybe even like Lloyd Austin and some of these others, they're all just puppets at the end of the day. They're all just figureheads, and the real problems are the people behind the scenes whose names we don't know.
Well, one last thing on this topic is if the right would approach this whenever they're dealing with people who are Democrats, people on the left. I'm talking specifically about like educated white people, like college-educated white people or college-educated assimilated immigrants, second-generation Americans. When they're dealing with that particular demographic, they need to understand that most of these people have probably never in their life carried on a conversation with a conservative. They've never met a Trump supporter in their life. They've never heard the other side of any of this stuff. And their information that they've received in the news has been highly curated. So you can't assume that they're just inherently evil. They hate people on the right. They hate the country. They hate America. You got to understand where they're coming from in their information. And you're not really going to be able to convince them to come over to your side until you can first get them to accept the factual basis of the information that you believe, because they think that everything you've read, they think that everything on Breitbart is a lie. Everything on Fox News is a lie. That everything on any right-wing media is a lie. And if you believe any of that, you're a
conspiracy theorist.
You're a conspiracy theorist.
They think that every right-wing media outlet is Alex Jones.
And this is why every time the New York Times runs any article that could potentially be used to criticize the left, there's a major, major outcry against the New York Times by their subscribers, because they understand that these people, college-educated Americans, respect the New York Times, and that if the New York Times deviates from the party line, then that could be used as an excuse to pull people away from that party. So that's why you have to understand these people, they don't have all of the facts. They don't have all the information.
So we talked earlier in this episode, of course, with the NSBA's reversal, that clearly cancel culture absolutely can work for the right. And not just the NSBA. We saw it with a handful of others, certainly Ellen DeGeneres, Chrissy Teigen, and others on the left who are also falling victim to cancel culture as well, which is so delicious to see. Something else that Jacob and I actually talked about offline the other day, of one way the right could gain political power again, and a really smart strategy that really is presenting itself to the right on a silver platter. The GOP just has to take it, is the ongoing supply chain crisis. Certainly is being caused, in part at least, by workers being forced out of the workforce by vaccine mandates. Few things are better at energizing an otherwise apolitical population or chasing a political portion of the population in the arms of the other side than something that is intrusive and disruptive. And vaccine mandates are both. They are demanding you inject this untested, unproven vaccine twice into your body and rewrite your RNA and possibly have birth defects and get blood clots, your heart may explode, whatever. And if you don't, you will lose your job, your kids can't go to school, you won't be able to eat. People aren't already eat anyways, but now the supply chain crisis is getting worse, but you will not be able to function. It's basically almost like cancel culture. You will not be able to live your life if you don't get the jab. So this has resulted in pushback from a group of Americans, a larger group that normally would vote for the Democratic Party. And that, of course, is the working class. And this is an interesting article I had to read from about a couple weeks ago from Newsweek. It's by Batya Unger Sargon, a deputy opinion editor at Newsweek, and this was written on October 11th. And the headline reads, quote, "Working class Americans are standing up for themselves, and the left is denouncing them." And this was written, of course, in the aftermath of the big Southwest Airlines fiasco, where over 1,000 Southwest Airlines flights were suddenly canceled or otherwise delayed over the course of just one weekend. And this resulted, of course, in numerous travel delays all around the country. And initially, they couldn't even roll out proper explanations for it. Some try to claim that the flight crews were just late. Others try to claim that there were problems with the Southwest Airlines app. No joke. A friend actually told me that absolutely is an excuse that was given to him at the airport when he was asking, what's the delay? Oh, I think we're having problems with the app. Yeah, like that's totally the cause. And this has been slowly spreading to other transportation-related industries. Amtrak, for example, also canceled a number of trains in the northeastern region due to, quote, unforeseen crew issues, end quote, according to Amtrak's Twitter. And you're seeing this elsewhere. There was a big strike of General Electric workers in Greenville, South Carolina. Over 100 workers staged a walkout protest against vaccine mandates. And Southwest Airlines still will not say it yet, but those who are in the know, and the unnamed sources, as it were, are saying it's because Southwest had a vaccine mandate in place that they were going to enforce, and basically say, if you're unvaccinated, we'll place you on suspended leave. And the workers overwhelmingly rebelled against this, and I think there is actually a lawsuit underway right now with a bunch of workers represented that says, this is a violation of our rights. You cannot force us to do this. And Southwest, of course, has since backed down on that and has indefinitely delayed the deadline to suspend unvaccinated workers. And what Unger Sargon points out in this article is that this is creating a golden opportunity for the American right to seize on this. And basically, once again, as Trump was trying to do this in 2016 and while he was president, is try to change the GOP into the Workers' Party. Workers, the blue-collar, working-class Americans who were once the backbone of the Democratic Party, right? The unions, what have you, who have been left behind as the Democratic Party moves away from working-class politics in support of, minority Olympics politics, social grievances and whatnot. So I wanted to read just a few excerpts here. Quote, "You might have expected that the left would be championing what looks like it might be a powerful form of collective action on the part of working class Americans. There was a time some can still recall when the left stood for labor and collective power. Instead, you saw prominent left-wing voices denouncing Southwest employees as terrorists and demanding they be put on no-fly lists. Many others defended the mass firing of nurses and cops," because this is also happening. There's stories all across the country in New York and other states with strict vaccine mandates. Nurses and frontline doctors and workers who were once being hailed. Remember, earlier in the pandemic, Jacob, when these people were being celebrated as, basically, you got to treat the nurses and doctors, frontline workers.
They were heroes, remember?
You got to treat them the same way you would treat the troops. These are heroes. And they're those really garbage, those vomit-inducing cartoons of, like, all the Marvel Comics superheroes bowing down to nurses as they walk through the halls. And again, these frontline heroes, by the way, were the nurses posting dancing videos on TikTok and Snapchat, by the way, which was, it just made it even more embarrassing. But they were heroes to the left. But now you have nurses coming out and saying, for medical reasons, for religious reasons, or other exemptions, they don't want to get vaccinated. And they're getting fired for it. And in fact, at that a CNN town hall Joe Biden just did the other day with Anderson Cooper, Cooper asked him, what do you think of, frontline workers and medical professionals, refusing to get vaccinated? Should they be fired? And Biden said, yes, they should be fired. And the audience cheered and applauded for that. So now the left has just completely done a 180 on this. So back to the article. And it was Republicans and conservatives, infamous for their laissez-faire free market policies that favor the rich, who were cheering the striking workers and tweeting the hashtag General Strike. This inversion of the politics that ruled the U.S. for much of the 20th century didn't happen overnight. More recently, it's an extension of the COVID lockdown class divide that separated those who could work from the safety of their homes, accountants and bankers and lawyers and project managers, and, yes, journalists, nice bit of self-awareness there, from those whose jobs required they brave the pandemic to support their families, grocery store workers, delivery men and women, drivers, pilots, small business owners, and, of course, healthcare workers. This was a class divide as much as an economic divide, the college-educated versus the working class. And you can see where each side of the political aisle sees its base by which position it took on this divide. Democrats favored lockdowns, while Republicans took the side of those whose work was neither outside the home or eliminated. And again, this is very much a continuation of the Trump phenomenon. It's not over yet, but the problem is that obviously the Republicans faced a setback in 2020, mostly with the voter fraud measures that were put in place. But ultimately, they absolutely can still seize back political power, and primarily in the Rust Belt. Again, a lot of these working class, Americans are in those crucial states that we needed to win in 2020, that Trump won in 2016. And if we take them back by such a margin that I think the outrage being caused by these vaccine mandates and the subsequent firings, that absolutely can create even more of a landslide, that people who will turn right around and go for the anti-lockdown party by such margins that Gretchen Whitmer and Tony Evers, I think that's the governor of Wisconsin, and Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania, they will not see it coming. They won't know what hit them until 2025, and after they've already lost re-election next year. But I fear, and we talked about this earlier, Jacob, Republicans are not seizing upon this opportunity as they should, because the Republican leadership, and again, I know Paul Ryan's gone. I know there are, I guess, better examples. The Mitch McConnells, the Kevin McCarthys, they are still very much in the pockets of Wall Street and the Chamber of Commerce. And until and unless that changes, Ronna McDaniel, the RNC, who's still, for some reason, a member of the Romney family, is still in charge of the RNC. Why that is, I will never know. But until these people are swapped out and replaced with people who actually understand the Trump phenomenon and what the base wants, the Republicans will, as it's been said, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And they will miss this possibly last opportunity to make a change for 2022 going into 2024.
Well, this actually ties in nicely to our main topic. We're going to talk about immigration, because the thing is, this is one issue that unites Republicans and Democrats. That is the leadership of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Both parties support massive immigration into this country. And this divide is perfectly played out in what we keep hearing about unemployment benefits. Remember, over the summer, Republicans kept complaining nonstop about the fact that the reason why the unemployment rate was still high, why there were so many people out of the workforce, businesses couldn't find people to hire, was because of these enhanced unemployment benefits that the Biden administration had extended until September 6th. So the problem with that is those enhanced unemployment benefits, most people, your average person on the street who is just parroting the talking points of Fox News and these other right-wing outlets, is that, I could say right-wing outlets, basically corporatist right outlets, is that the word on the street was that people are getting paid so much money to sit at home that nobody's going out and looking for work. Nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to get a job. But those enhanced unemployment benefits, all it did was add $300 a week on top of whatever the state added. So if you have a state like my home state of Alabama, I think it's like 300. I think it's already like 300 a week is the normal unemployment payout for people who have been laid off. So you add to that's just $600 a week. That's not a lot of money. I mean, especially if you're trying to support a family, that's not much money to live off of. Most people aren't just going to sit home and take in $600-700 a week rather than going out and looking for work. But even if they did, it's not like these unemployment benefits were going to be extended throughout the rest of the year. They was going to be expiring on September 6th, but you still had Republican governors who were ending this unemployment early. And so that is the enhanced unemployment insurance. They were knocking that off early. So what did keep restaurants and bars from finding workers? Were they correct that it was the incentive, the enhanced federal unemployment benefits that were keeping people from going out and getting jobs? There's been multiple studies on the states that cut off this enhanced unemployment early, and it didn't really have much of an effect at all on employment. In fact, it might have gone up maybe 0.2%, 0.5% in some states. And we know that these enhanced unemployment benefits did not really have much of an effect because they ended on September 6th, and restaurants and retail are still having trouble finding people. In fact, you could argue that restaurants are actually having more trouble today trying to find people to work for them than they were back in May and June. Rick Scott, Florida Senator Rick Scott, he said, quote, "We've given people so much money, they're not working." So they're not going out and getting jobs now that the unemployment benefits have run out. But now that people still aren't getting jobs like they were expected to, now that the unemployment benefits have run out, the Republicans are having to find another avenue because their whole theory has been completely debunked. So Rick Scott, Florida Senator Rick Scott, said, quote, "We've given people so much money, they're not working. I mean, look at how much money people put away because they got so much extra money," end quote. So you got all these Americans who are over leveraged, who are in debt and credit card debt over their eyeballs, or in student loan debt over their eyeballs. They can't afford anything. They don't even have $1,000 in the bank. The government throws them a few crumbs during this pandemic that made them get laid off. And now Rick Scott is complaining that they saved up that money. I mean, isn't this, in a healthy society, shouldn't we want people to save money? Shouldn't we encourage people to save money?
Ideally, I'm pretty sure that's the core of fiscal responsibility.
But not Rick Scott. Rick Scott is upset that you've got all these people who were collecting unemployment and they've saved their money rather than blowing their money at the mall. They've been responsible. And now they've got a little bit of savings up. So rather than having to immediately go take that minimum wage fast food job that they got laid off for, they now have more options. They can now, put in 4 or 5 applications. They can now apply for the Home Depot. They can apply for something that's going to pay them $12 an hour instead of $7.25 an hour. But that doesn't sit well with people like Rick Scott. They want these people to be. It really does give a window into how these politicians, a lot of these legacy Republican politicians, view the American people, including their own voters. They expect people to be living paycheck to paycheck because in their minds, you should be dependent on your employer. Remember that clip we played from the fill-in for the Mark Levin show?
Yes.
Remember he said that...
Why protest against your employer's vaccine mandates when that's just going to hurt their business?
But he said people shouldn't be reliant on the government for health care. They should be reliant on their employer for this stuff, for their wages and their health care. These politicians, people in the corporatist right, they literally want people living paycheck to paycheck. So that way they're forced to go get the first job that's offered to them. So that way the donors, because that's the thing, these Republicans, they were hearing from these restaurant owners who are Republican donors that they can't get workers. And they're basically beating down Republican politicians' doors saying, hey, give us our workers. We need our wage slaves back. Our wage slaves aren't coming back because they're sitting at home collecting an extra $300 a week. They need to come back and be happy with our $8 an hour, $9 an hour job that we're offering them. And so Rick Scott is upset that these people have been saving up, so now they can kind of, play the field. They can look for something a little bit better, and these restaurant owners aren't getting their wage slaves back. So there was a study conducted by researchers at Columbia University, Harvard University, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst that found that for every 8 people who lost benefits early, these are in the Republican-led states, where for every 8 people who lost their enhanced unemployment benefits early, 1 found a job by August. So Republicans took away, and I mean, think about how this is going to play politically. You've got people who are struggling financially, And the federal government is throwing them an extra few crumbs, throwing them 300 extra crumbs every week on top of the measly unemployment insurance that their state offers, which sometimes is like $250 a week. So they're making $550 a week, $600 a week. And their Republican governor decides, nope, you're making too much money. We're going to take that $300 away from you. We're just going to give, because the federal government is giving them this money. That's the thing. The state doesn't have to contribute anything more. It's not like Medicaid where they're telling the state, hey, we'll contribute 90 cents if you'll contribute 10 cents of enhanced unemployment. This is all coming from the federal government, just free money that the federal government is giving these states. And these Republican governors are like, nope, no thank you. We want our people to go back to work, so we don't want to accept this. So these people get their extra unemployment checks cut by these Republican governors, and for every 8 of them who ends up losing that extra 300, only 1 of them is able to find a job by August. That doesn't exactly play very well to the Trump base. I mean, you can
imagine
not
sustainable. Yeah,
you can imagine how a lot of these ex-Democrats who decided to vote for Trump, how they probably feel about the Republican Party now that that's happened.
Again, as has been said, Trump won despite the Republican Party, not because of it. They were lucky to have him as their nominee, because any other Republican would be touting this line. You'd have this increasingly out of touch sentiment. Like, Kristi Noem, who tweeted that, again, we love dunking on Kristi Noem. She said, if we believe in the free market, if you don't like your employer's vaccine mandate, you can always quit and go find an employer who won't force you to get the vaccine. She actually tweeted that, thinking that this is what people want to hear.
Well, this is their mentality, because most of these politicians have never actually had to work for a living. Like many of them have never actually worked in a restaurant in their life. They've never dug a ditch. They've never hammered a nail unless it was in their own home, in their own multi-million-dollar home. So they don't understand what it's like to be an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old, especially a 20-year-old college student, and having to choose between multiple minimum wage jobs with bosses that are all going to treat you like crap.
And so all this, keep in mind, saddled with student debt as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and for a job that's really not going to pay much once you do get the degree. But it turns out something else is happening. This is from Breitbart by Neil Monroe. It says, so restaurant executives were saying that less migration forces more respect for American employees. He writes, the shortage of migrants and willing Americans is forcing food industry CEOs to treat their employees with more respect and dignity, says personnel chief at one of the nation's largest restaurant firms. Quote, you've got to be receptive to feedback, said Rick Badgley at Brinker International, who owns the Chili's Maggiano's Little Italy restaurant chains. This is what he told an industry conference on October 13th. He continued, quote, the workforce that we're dealing with now has high standards, high demands, and high expectations. Make sure you're investing the time to listen to your team members, that they have invaluable feedback for you. Employees have a very distinct and really easy to follow motivators, said Badgley. He told attendees at the conference, which was organized by food delivery firm DoorDash, quote, what we've experienced at the macro level down to the restaurant level is that they mostly want flexibility with what has happened and with what we call now the gig economy, the side hustle. And compensation is important to everybody. What we found through surveys and talking to our frontline employees is that we need to align their compensation with their monthly bills, end quote. Many food industry companies hired workers under at-will contracts where the employees do not know how many hours they will be scheduled to work each day. And this is another thing that a lot of people don't understand about restaurant workers is they get hired and they may get 35 hours a week, which will cover rent, or it may turn out that their boss their manager wants to play favorites and likes another employee and decides to cut their hours to 20 hours a week. I've been in that boat before. They can't pay rent on 20 hours a week. So now they got to go get a second job, and now they got to work 2 minimum wage jobs, and then those schedules conflict. They might end up getting fired from one, or they happen to end their shift at 4 a.m. at one. They have to get up to go work at the second job at 6 a.m. in the morning, so they got 38 minutes of sleep. I've been in that boat before. And if they happen to sleep through their alarms because they've been working through the night, then they get fired at the second job, and they got to go find another second job. This is the life of your typical low-paid restaurant employees in the United States. Quote, traditionally in restaurants, Badgley says, quote, traditionally in restaurants it was, hey, this is the job. If you want these hours, great. If not, we'll find somebody else, end quote. Christopher Floyd, owner of a food industry recruitment firm, told the New York Times, quote, now employers have to say, you have the qualities we're looking for, and maybe we can work out a more flexible schedule that works for you. Badgley's recommendation comes amid widespread dissatisfaction by American restaurant workers, according to a September report by Black Box Intelligence, a firm that tracks the restaurant sector. It writes, quote, most people agree higher pay is the main reason employees are leaving for other industries. Another driver is a need for a more consistent schedule and income. 51% of workers chose to work in restaurants because of flexibility, But beyond that flexibility, employees want some sense of consistency in terms of what their schedule might be and their income as a result, end quote. Quote, we don't like to say this much, but it has long been the practice of many restaurants to hire staff as inexpensively as possible and provide them with the fewest benefits that they can, often by restricting their hours so they don't qualify as full-time employees, end quote. This is what Brett Thorne, senior food and beverage editor for Nation's Restaurant News, said. Now, this is normal. This is capitalism. This is just the way it works. An employer wants to maximize the profit, wants to pay his employees the least amount possible. The employees want to maximize their profit by working the least amount possible for the most money possible. This is the way the free market is supposed to work. The difference, though, is where a wrench is thrown into this is with immigration. Legal and illegal migrant labor is commonplace and beneficial for business, partly because it minimizes the emergence of a wage-boosting tight labor market among American restaurant workers or among their white-collar peers. In August, for example, federal officials charged 19 co-defendants for allegedly running an organized criminal enterprise from July 2003 to August 2021 that smuggled Mexican, Guatemalan, and El Salvadoran nationals who were not authorized to live or work in the United States. The ring supplied many workers to at least 45 restaurants across the Midwest. Nonetheless, the poor wages and working conditions are a step up for many poor migrants, partly because they know that U.S. jobs may allow them to successfully launch their children into the United States. And this is what you got to understand when it comes to the intersection of migration and restaurant workers or retail workers. These people are coming from areas where they're making $2, $3 an hour.
Even that.
Yeah, if even that. They're coming into this country where they literally sell themselves into indentured servant and into indentured servitude.
They're basically a new slave class at this point.
That's exactly what they are. When Virginia and other colonies were founded, most of the immigrants were poor people in London who were homeless, and they paid their fare under the understanding that they were going to be a slave for 5 years. They would have no rights. They would literally be the property of their owner for 5 years, but that would allow them to be able to live in the New World. Once they were freed after 5 years, they would then be given a small parcel of land. They would be able to farm. They'd have a better life eventually than they did back home in London. And this is the way it is for a lot of these Central American migrants. They understand their life for the first few years in America, maybe for the first 10 years, is going to be a living hell. They're going to have to pay off the coyotes. They're going to pay off the cartels. They're going to have to sell themselves into indentured servitude so that they'll have a better life in the future. American workers cannot compete with that. American workers in restaurants were already underpaid before the waves of migrants came into the country. And all this did was allow the restaurants to continue to lower wages, continue to lower benefits, to treat their employees terribly. The worst treated employees in this country are probably restaurant workers. And what the pandemic did, because it shut down the restaurants and it forced these restaurants to lay off their workers, is it allowed these workers to be able to get some breathing room. Because a lot of these workers for years and years, they've been living paycheck to paycheck, shift to shift. They go to bed at 2 a.m. They wake up at 8 a.m. Sometimes, there was one time I worked literally a 13-hour shift because I stayed for somebody who called out. And this is just the way it goes. If you want to have any chance of maybe getting a little 50-cent raise, then when someone says, hey, so-and-so called out of their 8-hour shift, do you want to take it? You say yes. And this is just the way it goes. Because
and if you're lucky, you may also get some nice tips over the course of the day. But again,
that's only if you're a server. If you're working in the kitchen, then you don't get anything. You're just going to have to be satisfied on that $7.25 an hour salary. But because of the pandemic, a lot of these workers ended up being able to go home. They ended up being able to go home. They were able to take some breathing space, spend some time with their family that they never saw because they were working all the time. And they were able to get a little bit of money from the government, kept them afloat, but it also allowed them to survey their options. And many of these workers, and some studies show that as many as 50% of restaurant workers before the pandemic are not going back to working in the restaurant industry.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is that the economy is changed permanently. People are talking about the fact that, of course, as a result of the pandemic, people are doing lots of remote work now. And some companies that are able to do it are saying, you know what, let's keep it with remote. There's real no reason to have, to keep the lights on in the office when people can just work remotely. And there's lots of businesses that are, shifting more so to delivery. And again, not all of them, but some of them are. That this is the beginning. We are undergoing the growing pains, if you will, of an economy that is systematically, fundamentally changing right before our very eyes. It's not going to go entirely back to the way it was before.
In the Food and Wine magazine, Jane Bredlinger is a former restaurant employee who gives her perspective on it. She writes, "It's not unemployment benefits that are stopping workers like me from returning to restaurants. In March 2020, most of us were cast off like yesterday's trash. In the days following the recent expiration of enhanced federal unemployment benefits, many people are looking at restaurant workers and wondering, will they or won't they? According to the National Restaurant Association State of the Industry Mid-Year Update, 3 out of every 4 restaurant owners now report employee hiring and retention as their greatest difficulty, and many have loudly blamed unemployment benefits as the reason workers aren't returned to restaurants. This summer, New York Post reporters wrote, quote, "Here's a tip. Wait staff make more staying home," blaming President Biden for New York City's shortage of food service workers who are supposedly, quote, "raking in cash from unemployment checks." Yeah, that extra $300 is really going to go a long way in New York City, where rent is like $2,000 a month. Quote, "A lot of people are like, well, I'm going to just enjoy the summer, spend time with family, keep collecting, and then go back to work in September," Jersey City restaurant owner Ava Johannes-Dotter told Al Jazeera. Quote, "Stimulus and unemployment are killing the workforce," McDonald's franchisee lamented to Business Insider. Now that unemployment has dried up, will those employees who've been holding out return to their jobs? The question misses the point entirely. As a longtime restaurant worker until the pandemic struck, I know plenty of former colleagues who have already returned to the industry. For those who haven't, including me, it's not unemployment benefits that are giving us pause. It's the feeling of being, well, over it. In my job as a cook pre-COVID, I was drowning. A high-stress job with long hours and no free time was like dry kindling for my anxiety and depression, and my performance worsened. Thrown into a competitive survival of the fittest culture that I was in no way equipped to handle, I often felt like everyone was standing by just watching me fail, and I completely relate. That's exactly what working in a restaurant, in the restaurant industry, especially where there's an oversupply of labor, is like. I'd relocated for the job, and quitting seemed like the ultimate failure. I felt paralyzed. Then the pandemic hit, and despite the confusion, bewilderment, and fear that came with the onset of a pandemic and the collapse of an industry, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I always knew that working in a restaurant would be difficult, and I thought I could meet the challenge. I relished the long nights on the line, the burns that lined my forearms like tiger stripes, my aching feet and sore back. I'd foregone family holidays and fell out with friends who worked 9-to-5 jobs. And just a personal anecdotal evidence of this. This was in 2013. Yeah, 2013. This is Christmas 2013. I was working at Chick-fil-A, and I requested Christmas Eve off, because they're open on Christmas Eve. You know, they don't even give their employees Christmas Eve off.
Wow.
So I requested.
But they can give Sundays off, but they can't give Christmas. Wow.
But they can't give Christmas Eve off. They're only closed on Christmas Day. So I requested Christmas Eve off. All I needed was one day. I didn't request a week, half a week. I just needed one day so I could go visit my family for Christmas and be right back on December 26th. I actually requested December 26th off as well, but I requested way in advance, like 2 months in advance. And the response I got from the assistant manager was, good luck. That was it.
Wow.
And sure enough, I'm scheduled on December 26th. I was scheduled on December 24th and December 26th.
So
I literally had to leave like December 20th on Christmas Eve at 10 p.m., arrive at, this would have been at like 4 a.m. to my parents.
Oh, my.
And then Christmas Day, I had to leave. I left at 2 a.m. in the morning on December 26th, and I arrived at literally 7:59. I walked in the door,
drove straight to work.
Clocked in at 7:50. Drove straight to work. Clocked in at 7:59. And because my phone had died, I didn't know what time it was. The clock on my car didn't work. It was an old '94 Toyota Camry.
Nice.
And so I didn't know what time it was. And I figured, because the way they operated is if you clocked in, if your shift started at 8 o'clock and you clocked in at 8 o'clock, you would get written up. Like, no joke.
Seriously?
You would get written up if you
for showing up on time.
For showing up on time. If you didn't clock in early, you were considered late. If you clocked in at 8 o'clock and you were supposed to start at 8 o'clock, you would get written up. And, you know, they didn't take excuses. So if I told them, well, look, I couldn't get off. My parents live 5.5 hours away. I drove all night, just to get here. If I had clocked in at 8 o'clock, I would have been written up because, for spending Christmas with my family. So I clocked in at 7:59 just by sheer luck. But so I completely relate to what they mean by, everyone's looking for an excuse to fire you because they've got, and this is what they told me whenever I applied at Chick-fil-A. They're like, hey, we've got 500 applications in there. Why should we hire you?
People are clamoring to work at Chick-fil-A.
And this is because in an area like that where there are very few factories around who hire no skilled or low skilled workers, fast food is pretty much all there is. So yeah,
that story is just making me even more happy. That is even happier that I personally have been boycotting Chick-fil-A for a while now. Like I was already after the CEO went woke last year due to the BLM stuff, but now
it's terrible.
Apparently, almost 10 years later, they were still very, even back when they were politically based, they were still very cruel to their workers, which is just unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
But this lady goes on, where's the glory in high wages and paid time off anyway? All of this I accepted without question, but I never imagined the toll of a toxic workplace on my mental health. And now I wonder if life really has to be this way. This summer, I spoke briefly with a San Francisco sommelier about his COVID-19 experience. I don't know what that is. When he lost his job, he moved west from Denver. His former restaurant had dropped its staff like yesterday's trash, and only just now they're calling us, begging us to come back, he said, but he'd already moved on. According to a report released by a job list in July, 38% of former restaurant workers surveyed stated that they would no longer be seeking work in the hospitality industry that fired them. I don't think this should come as a shock. In March 2020, most of us were cast off as overhead. A colleague told me about how uncommunicative her former workplace was. She writes, "It seems like two things are happening. Either employees aren't returning or they're coming back with a greater sense of worth. Quote, every restaurant in the city is hiring, so it feels like a unique opportunity to learn something new." One restaurant worker told me of her current job search in New York City. Quote, "I guess with restaurants trying to rebuild, they are promising the moon. I'm not sure how they'll be able to sustain labor costs long term, but I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts," end quote. She says she's heard of pastry shops offering, she's heard of pastry cook positions offering $22 an hour to start. Now, this is the new normal, but this is New York City. $22 an hour in New York City is not much money. That's a terrifying
thing.
That's actually that's a terrifying idea, to make $22 an hour in New York City.
I'm not sure if that's more of an indictment of the inflation going on right now or just how bad New York is, or maybe both.
But this is what they're offering now. They were offering less before the pandemic. This is because they're desperate for employees. Now they're having to raise it to $22 an hour.
Oh yeah, like Amazon, like Walmart, others are raising to $15 because they're desperate to go. Yeah, I see ads like that on YouTube. People are advertising, we're getting $15 an hour. Come work for us.
Which is fine in Kansas, but in New York City, $15 an hour, even $22 an hour just isn't that much. You literally cannot afford an apartment that is not government subsidized on that kind of salary. Like, you have to live in government housing if you make $22 an hour. She writes, "This is a good thing. When workers recognize their value and have the power to make demands, change happens. In this equation, it's the workplaces that have to get competitive. Will restaurants get the hint that living wages, health insurance, and vacation pay aren't luxuries? Will restaurant guests understand that their meal might cost more in order to provide a proper life for the person making it? Will all the people doing the real work, the dishwashers, the porters, the prep cooks, the line cooks, the busters, the servers, with little to no bargaining power, finally be recognized as the people who run this industry instead of the chiefs and owners that ride on their shoulders?" And the reality is this will continue as long as immigration does not continue to flow the way it is. As soon as if immigration continues to flow the way it is, you're going to see these restaurants be able to afford to go back to the way things were before the pandemic. Because here's the way the free market works. I mean, you have supply and demand of labor. Supply and demand of labor works the same way as supply and demand of goods and services. A restaurant owner wants to make money. That's why he created his restaurant. A restaurant worker does not have any capital and needs to exchange his labor for wages in order to pay rent, in order to buy food. That restaurant owner does not have any monetary incentive to pay his workers a living wage if he has millions and millions of third world people coming in from other countries where the average wage is 50 cents an hour. Mm-hmm. Why does he need to pay a worker $22 an hour when he can pay a Guatemalan $8 an hour?
$8, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to, the idea that restaurant owners or CEOs are going to be moral. There is no morality in markets.
It's all about the money.
That's just the way it is. That's the way it's supposed to be. You can't force people to be more, pay their workers above and beyond what they need to. And it just is.
You can't force individual business owners to be nationalists. They're going to put, the global economy over the well-being of their fellow citizens every single day of the week and twice on Sundays.
They're going to put their own profits above everything. And if you want to help American workers, the best way to help American workers is to seal that border shut. Mm-hmm. Keep the Hondurans out, keep the Salvadorans out, keep the Guatemalans out.
Keep the Haitians out.
Yeah, especially keep the Haitians out because they're worse off than the Central Americans.
They're like literally the poorest country in the entire world.
Yeah, they literally are. Yeah, you can't, but the thing is with these jobs, anyone can be trained to do them. You can train anyone from anywhere in the world to do these jobs for $9, $10 an hour, when Americans who would be making $20 an hour doing these jobs either have to just accept that lower standard of living. They have to basically commit fraud and claim disability, which is what a lot of Americans have done over the past few decades, or they go homeless. That's essentially what they're faced with. And that's why that's why the homeless population in cities is so high, especially out west. You've got all of these poor workers coming in from other countries who are willing to work for basically subsistence wages because they're making more money doing that than they would be in their home country. And Americans who simply can't afford to live on that are left to live on the streets. So if people actually care about workers, the best thing that they can do is advocate for sealing that border shut. When they do that, restaurants are going to be forced to hire Americans. They're going to be forced to pay Americans more. And yes, they're going to have to raise the prices. And yes, Americans are just going to have to get accustomed to paying what they should pay for food. Americans have been spoiled when it comes to fast food, when it comes to restaurants. If you go to Europe, you're not going to eat a Big Mac for $3.
No.
You're going to pay $10 for that.
In Europe, you don't get free refills. I learned that when I went to Scotland and Ireland with my family several years back. You have to pay for every single time you refill your drink.
But see, you got Americans, especially a lot of Republicans, that they look at what's going on in the country and they're complaining about the rising cost of, say, fast food or their Big Mac or whatever, and they're not realizing one of the things that's driving inflation is the fact that workers are not willing to be treated as peons anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're weighing their options. They're finding better paying jobs. They've saved up their money, and a lot of them have invested that money. They're doing other things. They're getting involved in the gig economy. So when wages rise like they should be on a normal market level, when you don't have massive numbers of immigrants coming in and filling these jobs, then Americans would have to pay more, just like they do in Europe. And so yeah, this is one of the reasons why restaurants can't find workers, is because for decades they were so used to treating their workers like garbage, treating them just basically treating them as expendable. And workers are realizing that they don't have to settle for that anymore. Especially, I mean, at least now that they've managed to save up a little bit of their unemployment insurance, they've saved up a little bit of their stimulus. They've been working odd jobs. Many of them have been working the gig economy. So, and many of them have just found better paying jobs overall that don't, outside the restaurant industry. But yeah, if you want the standard of living to rise, if you want wealth inequality to shrink, if you want Americans to be more, more involved. And this is another thing. A lot of the rank and file Republican voters, they're not able to do anything. They're not able to get involved in politics because they're living hand to mouth. They're living paycheck to paycheck. If you want more Republican rank and file voters, the vast proletariat, to get involved politically and overturn what progressivism has done to this country, you're going to have to see their standard of living is going to have to rise, because survival comes first, politics comes second. If you really want them to get involved, you've got to make sure that they can provide for their family and have a living wage. And the best way to do that is to cut off immigration and force restaurants to pay $20 an hour, to pay $25 an hour. And look, and this is something that Republican politicians just don't want to accept.
Exactly. Again, we talked about this back with the Southwest Airlines boycott and the Southwest Airlines workers strike, and how Republican leaders like McConnell and McCarthy and the others and Ronna McDaniel are still funded by big interests, by Wall Street, the Chamber of Commerce. And that brings me to one more thing, one last point I had to make on this same note before we close out this episode. Of course, those lovely, patriotic American nationalists at the Cato Institute, the libertarian think tank of all libertarian think tanks, they released a report obviously bemoaning this fact. They're absolutely in horror at this statement, at this assertion they have determined through the study. President Donald Trump's policies in the year 2020 stopped the inflow of roughly 1.2 million foreign workers, according to a report by the business-funded Cato Institute. That's how Breitbart's Neil Monroe describes them. This is a tweet from Cato author David Beer on that study. Quote, "It's a staggering cumulative reduction since March of 2020. It's undoubtedly contributing to America's historic labor shortage." Quote. He then goes on to say, he's the author of the report, and he concludes with, quote, "The Biden administration should open the borders now to allow more workers to fill open positions and increase economic growth." Thank you, David Beer. Thank you, Cato Institute. Yes, that's exactly what we need. But of course, again, these are libertarians. It's a big business-funded think tank in Washington, D.C. that's notorious for being hardcore pro-open borders and pro-immigration because, it'll increase the GDP by a couple 0.5% if we do this. So, and again, this is what I mean. If we do not change the mentality of the conservative establishment leadership, and I know these are libertarians, they're technically not conservatives, but there's a lot of other people in this think tank industry in DC who make policy, who speak to the lawmakers, who write the laws, who think this way. And until and unless we get rid of this Chamber of Commerce GOP, this Wall Street Republican, this Wall Street conservative mindset, nothing will change. And it is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And the Republicans will, of course, celebrate. They'll enjoy and appreciate, I should say, the fact that it is going to get worse because this could very well benefit them in the midterms. But they're not going to address the root causes that are continuing to prolong it in the first place until and unless they fight to shut the border and get big business interests out. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for this episode of The Right Take. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to follow all of our latest content and posts at our website, righttakepodcast.com. Follow all of our latest social media at righttakepodcast.com/subscribe, where you can also find the full list of podcast platforms where we are available. And if you guys are feeling so generous, righttakepodcast.com/support. We'll talk to you next week, guys.